Welcome to the Gym Plus Coffee podcast. Welcome to episode 10. I'm Ian, producer of the podcast and member of the Gym Plus Coffee community team. This week we have a very special episode. Co-founder Diarmuid McSweeney sits down with Rachel Corsie. Rachel is captain of the Scottish international football team, where she has over 140 appearances for her country. Having trained as a chartered accountant after university, Rachel talks about the similarities between her career crunching the numbers and her performance on the pitch. She talks about utilising similar attributes required, such as discipline and competitiveness, and explains how this helped her get to where she is today. Rachel's career highlights include playing in the US for 7 years and helping Scotland qualify for the Euros in 2017 and the World Cup in 2019. This was Scotland's first time qualifying for both competitions. Rachel is passionate about health and wellness and looking after herself. She admits she finds it hard to switch off as a captain, as many of her duties are performed off the pitch, but she manages to de-stress on the squash court with her fiancée Lisa and nerd out on making great coffee. We caught up with Rachel when she was in Dublin doing broadcast work for the World Cup on RTE. Hope you enjoy.
Rachel, you're very welcome to the Gym Plus Coffee podcast. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to do this big introduction for you because you've got so many accolades, but a Gym Plus Coffee ambassador, 140 caps for Scotland, Scottish captain, Aston Villa captain, and also there's a long career here, but I'm not going to do it justice. Do you want to start maybe just by, so many people will know who you are, but I'm sure there'll be people listening who won't be as familiar. Do you want to just give people a kind of a whistle-stop tour of your career, the clubs you've been at, how you got into football, and I suppose what's brought you all the way to Aston Villa?
Sure. I never know where to start with this. If you're best to start from the early years to now, or if you're best to go from now and backwards. But
all the way from Aberdeen. Go all the way.
Yeah, all the way from the northeast of Scotland. What a place. Grew up in Aberdeen. Kind of to a sporting family. My great grandfather played for Aberdeen, which my mum always likes me to throw that in early doors, but that's sort of where the passion, I think, for sport began. My mum's a big sports fan, I'd say. Didn't play football, played a few other sports. My dad's always played, so from a really young age, sort of 5, 6, I either was going to the football with my mum to watch, or my dad was taking me to literally fill the water bottles or put the corner flags down, take the nets up, whatever it was. So football was just kind of immersed in my life from a very young age. And then I would say I just had a generally sporty schooling kind of, I suppose, 15, 16 years, where I kind of, like most kids, hopefully still most kids, but sport was that kind of outside to school. It was a good balance of, as school gets harder and harder and more exams, it was that kind of offload of stress. And it kind of got more serious every year without me realising. And then I had some youth national team experience kind of around 15 or 16, which probably started the ball rolling to think, maybe I'm actually not bad at football. But still, it was something I wanted to go to university. I was always going to kind of study at that point in time. Probably the game is nowhere near as developed as it is now, where the opportunities are obviously much wider. So just kind of playing locally, played for Stonehaven as a youth, then went to Aberdeen and played my first senior football there. Progressed on to Glasgow City, who I'm sure some more listeners will have heard of them, because I think over the last years they've actually met quite a few Irish teams in the Champions League. So played for them for a long time, and that was where probably I would have said my first experience of professional football started whilst I still wasn't getting paid to play. So it was that kind of idea of you're living like a professional athlete, but you're not earning like a professional athlete type idea. And it kind of matched up quite perfectly with finishing my degree in accounting and finance. I went on to work for one of the big firms where I did my professional exams. And then at the point where I qualified as a chartered accountant, I was now living in Glasgow, was involved in the national team. I think around that point I'd probably played, it was about 24, 25 at this point. I'd played about 50 games for Scotland maybe, won a few league titles with Glasgow City, but was also still working kind of 60, 70 hours a week in the audit world. And it was that point that partner pulled me into his office and said, I think you either have to take the accounting world seriously and decide you're going to work up your way up the ladder here, or, and this is what I recommend, and I don't know if this was a reflection on my audit work, he was like, I think you should try and see if there's professional opportunities.
Do you think sorry, just to interrupt, do you think you benefited from that? Like
that conversation?
Well, just from actually before going full professional sport career, that you actually had you had an accounting career that you could kind of compare the two in a way, that you weren't just straight into professional sport to get.
Definitely. And I think interestingly, it's comparable in more ways than some people realize, because it's also very competitive. So I worked for one of the big firms, Ernst & Young, and I think the year I got a graduate job, there was 600 jobs in the UK and Ireland, and there was 80,000 applicants. So it's also the type of world where you're talking about people that are high performing in a different capacity. And I probably didn't realise that at the time. I was fortunate. I went to Robert Gordon University, and one of my third year was a placement year. So I kind of got my foot in the door a little bit early, and then by the time I had to go back and finish my degree, and provided I got the grades, I would get a graduate position. So I'm not saying I wouldn't have got one otherwise, but that kind of gave me a little in. And then it was only afterwards you then hear the numbers and you realise, wow, okay, this is a big organisation. But also I think there's just loads of transferable skills, like the discipline, managing your time, carrying responsibility, taking that pride in just the work that you do. And I think all these things they're similar principles and values to what you attribute to any success in any field, probably, and definitely in the sense of a football capacity. So
tell us about the football.
How
did you go? Yeah, Scotland, England, Australia, America, Australia.
Oh,
yes. Tell us about that.
So I did make the decision, which was fairly scary. It was the beginning of 2014. I had a few options, but I decided to go to England. So I went to Notts County, who at the time they were in the WSL. And for me, it was just a total shot in the dark. Like I didn't really know what I was getting myself in for. I remember handing in my notice, remember leaving work. I remember like packing, I had a little blue Clio, and I remember like packing it with everything I kind of owned, it felt like, and just getting in the car and driving on the motorway, and just off I went to Nottingham, and that was me. That was my first year as a pro, and I really loved it. And this is one thing that I don't want sympathy for this at all, but the hardest thing for me was I went from sort of my days starting at 5:30 in the morning, getting up, going to the gym, shower, change, going to work, spending 10 hours at work, getting changed in the work toilets, going to training again, getting home at night, 10 o'clock, do your washing, make your meals, pack your bag for tomorrow, and doing that all over again, Monday to Friday, studying all day Saturday, Sunday was game day. And that was kind of my life when I was in those 2-3 years being an accountant and trying to be a footballer, to then being a professional footballer, where all of a sudden you get up much later than 5:30 in the morning. You go to training for a few hours, maybe spend a bit more time at the club doing, meetings or, gym, whatever it might be that you have on that day. And then you're home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you're meant to rest and let your body recover. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm like, were you meant to do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Which everyone's like, that sounds absolute like crazy. Like, you can't moan about that. Most people would love to have nothing to do at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But that was one of the things I remember finding, like, mentally for me, that was hard.
It's time for a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the episode. Just to let you know that we have a special discount code for podcast listeners. If you go to our website and enter POD15, you'll get 15% off. That's POD15 for 15% off on all Gym Plus Coffee websites. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and turn on that notification button so you never miss an episode. But let's get back to the chat.
Anyway, that was my first year, and then at the end of that year I had the opportunity to go to the US, which again, I didn't probably fully know quite what I was going to, but I did know that it was the place for women's soccer, as they would call it. And I felt it was an experience that I had to take. So I made that jump. And I didn't think when I did it that I would end up spending 7 years playing in the league over there, but I did. And I absolutely loved it. I had 3 years in Seattle, 3 years in Salt Lake City, 1 year in Kansas City. All three totally different, like just totally different experiences, and all amazing in their own right for very different reasons. I loved the football. And then I think within that, there was an opportunity as well. There was 2017 Euros, which Scotland qualified for the first time at any major tournament. And then following on from that, we had the 2019 World Cup. Again, the first time Scotland had qualified for the World Cup. So that kind of overlapped with that period in the US. So that's probably some of kind of my favourite years when I think back to what I have achieved. And then, as you mentioned, within that, I had a little spell in Australia too that I squeezed in. So my carbon footprint's not looking great, but yeah, it's also amazing, and it's one of those parts of the job that's just an added bonus to get to see so many different places.
Absolutely, to get to like properly live and play professionally in pretty cool cities like Seattle, I'd imagine,
Very
is a
cool.
nice place to live.
Yes.
Maybe Kansas, not so much.
Very different. Do you know what, randomly I was thinking about this, this is so random, but it's like famous for barbecue, and I'd never experienced true, like obviously I've had a barbecue before, but true barbecue food is what Kansas is sort of known for. And I was just thinking about it the other day and how I actually was missing it. I think I must have been, I don't know, feeling a lull through the summer that crossed my mind. But that was probably one of the highs of Kansas. But yeah, Seattle's probably one of my favourite places that I've been. Everywhere in Australia I went, I loved that. And I really enjoyed Salt Lake too. It was a place before I went, I probably would say I knew nothing about. And just the scenery and national parks that are around there, like you could go on a different hike, I think, every day for 5 years. Like there's just so much outdoor activity to do that I almost regret that I didn't do more, because you kind of don't see it ever coming to an end, or you don't think about that. And when I did move to Kansas in 2021, it would have been, I didn't anticipate that I would be moving on from Salt Lake at that point, so I kind of feel like I missed out, so I'll need to go back.
Obviously the World Cup is on at the moment.
Yes.
I have to mention it. I feel like I shouldn't mention it to you, but I have to mention. But it's obviously a huge moment for women's football, women's soccer, whatever you want to call it. If we just forget about the games and the competition, but just think about the sport, and you compare now to when you joined Notts County, can you give people just a bit of a flavour of like how stark are we talking about here? Like what's so different now? What's it like the WSL? Obviously the profile of the WSL is so much bigger. The clubs feel so much more professional. Just give people a sense of the difference in that time period and what it's like now to be a women's professional player in something like the WSL.
Yeah. Oh, it is very hard to quantify. And for me, I think this is a little bit before that 2014 period, but even for me, even when I've signed my first, or when I was playing senior football for my early years, so say I was like 19, 20, I remember one club, and it was around winter, and it was because sort of some of the facilities were restricted because of the weather, but I remember training on concrete. I remember there was, and we only, at that point as well, we normally only train twice a week, so you'd only be training a Tuesday and a Thursday, and you'd be training on a concrete pitch and using like traffic cones for goals. And that was kind of how it began for me. And And I think that's one thing in itself where you're like, wow, okay, we have come a long way. But then another thing is the fact that we all just did that. Like, that actually seemed fine at the time. You didn't even think to go, maybe this isn't good for our bodies, or like maybe we actually should ask for a pitch that maybe is of a better surface. Yeah. So it's come such a long way, and I think it's only going to keep improving. And now we're starting to see, you know, the youth players come through who've had the chance to even just have a little chunk of their youth career within an academy setup. Now most of the big clubs have academies, so it's given kids age of 13, 14, 15 the chance to come in from a younger age and do that physical development that when most of us that are sort of my age, a little bit younger as well, and obviously the older players too, we just didn't have that. Like, when I was coming through those age groups, I wasn't allowed to play in the school team, which I don't, again, have any resentment towards that, because I actually loved just playing all the sports that we couldn't, you know, so it was just the netball on a Monday, or badminton, or volleyball, or cross country, whatever it was, you just went for it. But now you're starting to see clubs have put things in place that are going to allow girls to have a far better chance to, you know, make the best of their own careers, but also just that's going to drive the standards. And just, you know, in every capacity, just looking at this World Cup, the stadiums they're playing at, the crowds we're now getting. I think FIFA announced that this is the first time revenue-wise it's broken even, which I think is such a big landmark. Because naturally, you know, finances are required for everything. Like, that is fundamental, you know, and we understand that for a long time we've needed people to invest knowing that the returns will come down the line. And I think this is maybe one of the first really big markers where you can say this is a pretty big thing to be able to say, like, we're now at a place where we can break even, and that's moving in a pretty steep trajectory towards it becoming incredibly profitable.
And having the commercial elements separate from, it was always grouped together, like the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup, and now it's separate. Just feels like way more sense, and obviously that helps then to bring in bigger sponsors. Maybe just kind of to go in a different direction for a second, I think maybe people can sometimes get lost in the routines and what professional athletes are up to, but a lot of the conversations we have on the podcast are with people about, you know, much wider kind of health and wellness trends, things that are happening in health and fitness. Mm-hmm. You know, all the latest, like whether it's like spin classes or CrossFit gyms or whatever the thing that's popping up. And you actually even mentioned it there with the sports that you played when you were growing up. So you kind of have a wider sense of a health and fitness journey yourself, let's say. So like outside of football, like how do you look after yourself? What's your relationship with health and wellness and fitness outside of your job, let's say?
Yeah. It's probably, it's tough to separate them to some degree, but in the sense of, I think, as I've got older, I've probably become more and more passionate about that aspect generally, and in turn it obviously feeds back into my football career. But I think I've always felt from the youngest age that sport is kind of key to just everything within my life. Like, when I think about the people that I'm best friends with, when I think about trying to, you know, get through hard times at school, when I think about times when I had exams to sit, when I think about traveling and all the places I've been, like almost everything in life that I've done that's had an influence on me, there's almost always a direct correlation with just sport and exercise and activity. So for me, it's just something that I know I just love. Like, I love to compete. I love to be outdoors. I love to be playing games. I probably would choose team sports mostly, but I've also learned to enjoy other sports. My fiancée is a squash player, and I'd never played squash till I met her. And sometimes I still wish I'd never played squash because I'm really bad at it, and that really annoys me. But I just think it feeds into society in such a huge way that I always just, I know how powerful it's been and influential it's been to me. I always want other people to have the chance to share that feeling. And then in terms of general well-being, I think, again, sleep, nutrition and hydration are probably the three most important things to me as a professional athlete. But I've also realised they're the three most important things, kind of full stop. And when you get those three things right, you typically find that most things in life feel better, that can be controlled. There's obviously things in life that happen that, that's not going to change how rubbish they might feel at the time. But I just think those three things, to me, I've noticed the physical impact they've had in terms of my professional capacity. But I think for everyone, they have huge importance. And it's probably an area that for a lot of people, they don't feel they have that much knowledge on.
Sleep is becoming just like this massive thing now, isn't it? Which seems so obvious even when you say it out loud.
Yeah.
But you're wearing a Whoop.
A Whoop, yeah.
I'm wearing a Whoop. That's been the thing for me over the last 6 months, which is just waking up every day and coming into the office or wherever I'm going and just looking, and straight away you just look at your sleep score and it's either terrible or good, and that's exactly how you're feeling. So is there kind of a pressure with being a professional athlete that conflicts with the passion you just spoke about? I spoke to someone recently who's became a yoga teacher, and then they're really passionate about yoga, but now all of a sudden they're making a living from yoga. And they said they felt this kind of conflict between the two. Is that sometimes hard to balance when there's obviously, it's different, it's a competitive sport, but there's a pressure around performance but it's also something you love to do. Is that hard to balance?
I don't think it's hard to balance, but I can understand that and relate to that feeling. And I think there is a part when it becomes professional. There are certain things that then become non-negotiable, that if it wasn't professional, you wouldn't have the same dilemma. For example, throughout your career, I've had to miss loads of, family occasions, and those are things that you can't get back, but there's a requirement for your job where sometimes these things are just not possible for you to attend. And you wouldn't necessarily change that, but if it wasn't your profession, you would probably be able to, make a different decision. I also think there are parts of sport that I do miss, that I look forward to when I'm not a professional athlete anymore, kind of engaged in that recreational side of it, and kind of just, almost going back to how sport in some ways started. Just, going out with your friends and then also kind of that social element, which there's a lot of good parts of that too within the professional game, but when it is your job, it is slightly different.
What is next for you? The WSL is back in October?
It is, yeah.
So you're going back into pre-season soon enough, surely?
Very, very soon. Yeah, we're in like the pre-season, which is, you're kind of like bracing yourself for the tough few weeks at the beginning. But the first game's the 1st of October, which will be a long break. I think, the last league game we played was the end of May, so it's 4 months of no league games, which is obviously slightly longer than normal, mostly because of the World Cup and how it's fallen quite late in the summer. So it will be quite a while. But we play Man United, so the fixtures came out recently. So Man United at home is our first game, and I think just having that little tangible element of knowing who you're going to play is, I don't know, for me that's nice, because it kind of starts to bring it to life a bit, and then you just kind of engage. I find you engage a bit more in your training, and you kind of can start to visualise, I suppose, and that's exciting because it is the best. I love being a professional athlete. I absolutely love what we do. I love game day, but there's also some tough days in amongst that with the training and the hard graft that goes into that. So it's nice to look forward to kind of the start of the season. And
how are you feeling about the season for you and Villa?
Excited. We had a great season last year, which will make this season, I think, emotionally and mentally a little tougher. Just because now we've set a bit of a marker whereby other teams now will, I think, look at us a little differently than probably how they did at this point last year. So that's exciting, and you want it to be that way. And I also think we've got the few early fixtures we have, it's going to be quite a tough start to the season, so we'll need to be ready.
Great. I have one last question. So as you know, well, we built Gym Plus Coffee around that idea to make life richer. We've been banging on about it for about 7 years, and built the whole community around that idea. What does make life richer mean to you, just when you hear those words? And you can answer by just giving a definition, or just from your own experience as an athlete, or just in any way you want. It's just we've been asking everybody that we've been interviewing, because I think it's going to be really interesting when you get it from so many different perspectives. So when you hear that, make life richer, what does that idea mean to you?
For me, that is, this sounds really simplistic, but I will elaborate. To me, it's making as many good decisions as you possibly can, in the sense of literally everything within your life. So going back to kind of the whole sleep thing, like, make a good decision to go to bed at a good time, because it's going to make tomorrow feel better. Or make a good decision to hydrate throughout the day, because that's going to make you function a little bit better and might make you feel a little better. And it can be quite difficult whenever you kind of set sort of individual goals or kind of target for yourself, just kind of see that in the distance, and the journey to that can seem quite difficult. But then when you break it down into just the small day-to-day decisions that we make all the time, then I think you can make a huge difference, and getting to the end point becomes hopefully a little simpler. Then to add to that, I was actually listening to a different podcast, and I'm going to steal this idea, but I can't remember who it was, but someone was essentially saying, what are the 3 worst things that you would say you have on your mind at the moment? And then when you think about that, then he was saying, can you eliminate any of those? And hopefully you can. And if you can't, can you just take the dial and turn it down a little? And I kind of like that concept too. And I think it's just similar in the sense of, there's a lot of things we can control, a lot of things we can't control, but try your best to kind of make the little things so that your life is richer.
Really interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard that before. I was going to take the piss out of you for the first part of the answer was such a disciplined athlete's response, but the second one is I've never heard that before. Yeah, because everything just builds up in everyone's head, doesn't it? And if you can just think about it and dial it down a bit, then you're kind of taking the pressure off yourself a small bit. Thank you so much for coming in, and best of luck for the season ahead.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Gym Plus Coffee podcast. If you enjoy these conversations, don't forget to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and turn on that notification button so you never miss an episode. Don't forget, we have a special discount code for podcast listeners. Go to our website and enter POD15 for 15% off. That's POD15 for 15% off on all Gym Plus Coffee websites. Thanks for listening.